Next Curve.
Welcome to another episode of Next Curve's Rethink podcast, where tech industry thought leaders discuss the trends and the technologies that are shaping our digital future. And I'm Leonard Lee, Managing Director and founder of Next Curve. And today, I am happy to welcome a special guest, the Honorable Paul Wilson of 5G UK. And it's great to have you, Paul. You know, it's a long time coming. I actually wanted to have you on a podcast last year, I think, after we met in Nice for TM Forum. If you don't mind, take a moment to introduce yourself and share your background and the work and the many projects that you're involved in.
I'm going to give a very rapid introduction, then we can get into the meat and potatoes. But okay. I worked in fintech for a long time, 15 years for SunGard Capital Markets, fintech leader. And then at the start of this last decade, about 2012, became fascinated in how could we use tech, not just for financial markets, but actually to address some of the bigger issues that we're all facing around the world, particularly maybe environment, rapid urbanization, aging population, these kind of issues. And it's taken me on a fascinating journey over the last few years, starting with setting up Bristol is Open as a smart city project in the UK, which was the world's first open programmable city. Then launching something that we called the City as a Platform Manifesto with TM Forum, which got over 200 organizations behind it, looking at the ethics and principles of how to use data in cities to liberate economies and help local people. And then more recently, working with the UK government on its UK 5G testbeds and trials, which has been a £200 million or $300 million program to look at innovating in 5G testbeds across the UK. And today I work with UK 5G, which is like a body that helps coordinate that. And I'm also involved in a health tech startup as well out of Oxford University, and various other things too as well.
You're an incredibly busy guy.
You've got to do something, haven't you?
Paul, today we're going to talk about 5G, right? And more specifically, what is 5G innovation and where should we think about placing 5G bets? And where will it bring the benefits, right, early on? Because as you and I discussed before we press the start button here, or the record button, is that we have these new 5G networks that have been commercially rolled out. And there's still a lot of talk about how do the telcos, how do end users get benefit from the network, right? And it seems like everyone's still scratching their heads wondering, okay, where's all that magic that was promised before these commercial rollouts with the high expectations that were set?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it, that the 5G networks have been rolled out. Really what's been rolled out is an extension of the 4G LTE of today, with some small cells doing some clever stuff. I don't really think that's the promise of 5G. That's really just a little bit of tech has been rolled out to do enhanced mobile broadband and extend today's existing model. And understandably for the wider market, the wider public is now confused because it's thinking 5G is going to be this big deal, but all I can think it actually does is allow me to get a faster movie on my phone and maybe do some mobile gaming. Did I need that? I'm not really sure I need that. And that's the slight challenge of where we're at, because I think that's to misunderstand what we're doing with 5G. And actually the big deal with 5G is almost when you've got your autonomous network and you're able to do heterogeneous use cases. This is the real value, but that requires a lot of shift in the operating model of operators so that they can support many different heterogeneous use cases, from the autonomous car to the smart city to the health to the blah blah, all sorts of things. And that is why in the UK we set up the 5G testbeds and trials, because they were focused on market stimulation around industry verticals. So we've now got nearly 30 different testbeds that range from things like salmon fishing off the Orkneys, doing IoT sensing of fish, through to transport testbeds doing autonomous cars, health and social care testbeds in Liverpool, tourism test beds in Bath, and on it goes, to be honest. Ambulance, emergency response in Birmingham. And, frankly, we've done it around the whole country and by industry vertical. And this is understandably confusing to many people who, your average perhaps consumer is thinking, I just thought this was about my phone. I don't even understand what's going on anymore. But really, that's where 5G, we need to be talking about industrial use cases rather than just selling a faster phone, which I'm not sure that many people are overly excited about anymore.
And so what are some of the areas that you see are areas of focus for these test beds? I mean, you've named off a number of different scenarios, but are there particular categories that you see test bed activity or investments?
The investment stimulated by the ones I'm involved, UK government, who has run in the region of now nearly 30 different innovation projects where you have to form a consortium between companies and maybe companies and places, maybe sometimes it's a city or a university, but definitely private sector. And you bid in and you win the money and you run a test bed. A couple of examples might be in Liverpool, in the UK, local government's budgets are being increasingly consumed by providing health and social care services out to their community, and particularly to an aging population. Mm. So what the Liverpool Health and Social Care test bed did was it put basically a hyper version of telehealth in people's houses in the poorest part of town. Now that's where the coverage was also the worst, because it was literally very poor and people were not using much fixed connectivity and mobile phone use was low. So it hadn't been an investment area for the operators. So we put very sophisticated 5G antennas up and gave a very positive experience. What was intriguing for that was that as much of the test bed was about, getting the tech to work, but actually reflecting on the use case. So did people like it? Or did they feel like this was just being more isolated in their homes? They're just being served with tech now when they maybe used to see a nurse or something. Well, the very interesting thing on that test bed is the overwhelming body of people liked it a lot, mainly because when they were being visited by a nurse once a day, the nurse would show up late because the traffic was bad or someone before them had been very busy. And they became anxious about, is the nurse coming? Is the nurse not coming? And the nurse was supposed to come at 4:00, but now it's already 4:20 and they're not here. Just life happened, right? But when they found that they were doing this thing, lo and behold, the thing that was going to happen at 4 happened at 4. And the same person was on the line, a bit like you and me now. And they developed a rapport and actually found that their sense of reliable interaction increased. That's interesting because not only did the tech work, but the service was seen to be an enhancement of a previous completely human service, which surprised me personally, actually, but they then will scale this up. So that's a health and social care example. In the UK, we find that if we were to digitize our railway signalling, we use the train a lot, we could increase the rolling stock on the tracks by 40% increase in rolling stock because we're using analog signals. And that means that we need to keep the trains apart. Mm-hmm. They don't run into each other. It's bad when that happens. So we have analog signaling. If we digitize the signaling, it worked like the underground in London, the metro in London, where now you could have a train every minute. And actually, we wouldn't get to trains every minute, but we would get a 40% increase in rolling stock on the railways as the railways are getting, or have been before COVID, busier and busier. So that was another one around digital signaling and how to make sure digital signaling can work when you've got large pieces of metal flowing down tracks at high speed. And then another one might be, the Roman baths in Bath, beautiful place, 2,000 years old nearly. And we created augmented reality experience in that to stimulate tourism. And you're looking there, you can see you're like a Roman soldier walking around and see how it would have been in a more exciting way. Then there was actually a medieval version where it had fallen down and become a pig farm. And you could see the pig farmer in the medieval days when the thing was neglected, and then you could see it being rebuilt up as a tourist destination. So it just was like using augmented reality, using 5G to increase tourism experience. And these are, these kind of trials are going on. It's good because it's it's causing us to think through what's the point of the tech.
Right.
Because whilst the telco community can see the point, if the actual users at the verticals have no hands-on touchy-feely, the chance of actually this taking off is not good. So that was the point of doing these stimulation test beds.
Yeah. So how long have these test beds been going on? I mean, these programs, when did they start?
The program began in 2017, really got going in 2018, and it's going now. You can read all about every testbed on uk5g.org. There's just been our latest round called 5G Create of about 6 or 8 new testbeds to be announced shortly. And I mean, it's involved everybody. All the players are involved in this whole thing. Yeah.
And so it seems like there's a lot of learning. I mean, there's a lot of investment in these test beds, but then there's also a lot of learning that's coming out, right? And so what happens to all of that? Is it just a test bed isolated to that test bed in that particular development community, or is there broader sharing that's happening?
In phase one, I think that the whole phase one of this program, which is the current manifestation, getting a testbed going has been the goal. And so that is now happening in manufacturing sites, all sorts of places. As we think about what to do in the next phase of this, begin to realize that it would be pretty smart to, in the next phase, begin to share learning at scale. Maybe actually even to build some R&D infrastructure, virtualized infrastructure, like a network as a service type capability, maybe building on the test beds that have now been planted all around the place, and other ones that existed separate to that program. So the discussion now is how to actually build on the first round, where these, they were fairly isolated projects, came into existence. How now to share that learning in a virtualized kind of digital way? Can you imagine? And that would, we're excited to try and think through and work through how would we bring that about. So there's quite a lot of thinking going on there. We're not yet there in the doing, but we're at the thinking stage of how could we actually begin to do R&D across multiple places, across multiple vertical sectors, and what would that look like, and what would be common? How would you federate this R&D environment, and how would you share learning on standards and become a testing center for the world, perhaps? Testbed Britain, some people have called it.
So is the intent to make this more of a global initiative, or is it because there's a lot of these types of efforts that originate out of the UK, right? Especially in the telco industry. So is the aspiration to go bigger than the UK?
Certainly in that kind of, if you're going to play in this game, you play globally, right? Little point in having isolated standards environment. One of the big successes of the whole connectivity industry has been the use of common and open standards. So in a sense, you see the current politics flying against that, to all of our surprise, perhaps, including Brexit. You got to mention it. So, and also the expulsion of what high-risk vendors Huawei from the UK scene. This is, well, we all know it's there. I'm not necessarily a big fan of this stuff, but so what do I think? What we want to do, though, is we see the UK as being big enough to be taken seriously. It has a serious credibility enough globally, but small enough to actually get around really fast. And if we learned how to play nicely with each other, could we become a very interesting innovation testbed? And in a post-Brexit world, we need to find our newfound form internationally.
Right.
And something like this is exciting a lot of people here, both from academia, from government, and from private sector companies too, that maybe we could actually become an innovation playground, as it were, for the world. That would make a lot of people very happy.
I'm sure. What are some of the key takeaways or lessons learned that have been realized through some of these test beds that have been completed? I mean, are there any observations that you guys have been making in terms of what works, what doesn't, or what are some of the pitfalls in terms of solution design or trying to maybe even commercialize or go to market with some of the solutions that come out of these test beds?
I think a big observation has been that it's not good enough just to look at making the tech work. Mm-hmm. And it is a challenge to bring about lots of this new tech and to, it's new skills and new things for people to see if they work, and that's okay. But really, that's half the story. More the issue is, okay, the techs work. Now, what is it really doing to us? Mm-hmm. So, for example, I was visiting one of the test beds and looking with one of the engineers about how they'd been playing around with facial recognition on a 5G network and how they'd got it to go even faster. Mm-hmm. So now the facial recognition is working really, really fast. Look at the old way, look at the new way. Woo! Mm-hmm. Way better. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, yeah, that's sort of great, but you've speeded up surveillance capitalism, you've speeded up surveillance governance more. Is that good? We need to ask the question now, what are the ethics around this, facial recognition surveillance? And the engineer involved, very capable engineer, just didn't think that was part of his remit to be thinking about that. It was my job to make it go faster. But it was someone else's remit to think about, should we even be doing this? And I think that takes us into this very interesting realm where we're going to be headed in this decade, where we see a lot more engagement around the issues of governance and ethics and the philosophy. Because the engineering and tech communities are, we can do it, we can go faster, we can do more. Right. Mm-hmm. But when does the question come, should we? Or to what purpose is this happening? Right. And I actually genuinely believe enough people are thinking like that for us to begin to grow up a little bit and not just get excited about toys.
Right, but was that part of the criteria that was used to select these testbed proposals? And the funding? I mean, was there some framework that was used to determine whether or not the particular project had a potential to have near-term or critical benefit to society or government or public good, maybe?
In the case of UK 5G, there was thinking around two dynamics very, very much so. One was, where is this physically happening around our country, north, south, east, and west? Then there was definitely thinking around which sectors are we touching. We're touching logistics, manufacturing, health, transport, entertainment, so there was a verticals approach. Then I think what happened was we hit an unexpected, to be honest, backlash against 5G. We had a lot of people going, 5G. So
the tower burning stuff?
We had, somewhere between 70 and 80 different masts being burned around the country.
Oh, okay.
Including some which were providing central comms for emergency health. And, so there was a groundswell of anger about corporate power. Let's say that. And I think it's, rather than just brush it under the carpet, it's really worth thinking about why is that happening? What is that about? And I think on the back of that, it caused a deeper reflection on the ethics of all of this. But I think that's no bad thing, and responsible social science needs to come here as well as responsible science. And we see that. I'm involved in something called Bristol Digital Futures Institute, which is an academic institute which brings social scientists together with technologists, even into quantum and AI. And it's got philosophers and economists and sociologists involved, and legal people as well as computer science. So those groups are beginning to, I know that's not the only one there is. I mean, it's a good one, but there are others that I see cropping up. Maybe there was one that came out of the smart city in Toronto that Google were involved, sidewalk thing there. And there are quite a growing number of groups of people who are tech savvy, who are also now combining with social science savvy people to think through this. And I think that's very much needed. And those groups will advise government fairly soon now. I think this is no longer just fantasy sci-fi. This is now beginning to kick in about now, and will really escalate over the course of this decade.
I think you're making a great point. This need to somehow translate to the public what the benefits and the pros and the cons, the potential societal impacts of these technologies will be beyond just some of these general and typically hyped notions. I even think within the industry, our little telco tech bubble, that's even a challenge to think about how we can somehow convey what the implications of these technologies are to end markets. It's not only a daunting challenge, but then when you look at the consumer, they're so detached, like you were mentioning earlier, so detached from the technology. What you just mentioned, bridging science, technology with social science, is going to be increasingly important, especially given the velocity of change, right? I mean, if you look at the topic of privacy in the United States, we have a big problem. There's consumers that don't know the difference between security, privacy, and trust. It's just not their thing, right? We have to deal with this stuff all the time, but even within our industry,
it's changing our world already, and it's only going to accelerate. When trains came out, people protested against them, saying they're going to kill you because the oxygen will be sucked out of your lungs. you will die on these things. We must oppose them now. And I do feel a little bit like we're at an era like that where people don't really understand what's going to go. There's fear. Mm-hmm. But some of it, there is going to be massive change. People are going to, it is a big step.
Well, there's fears that are unfounded, but then there's also things that should be feared that go unnoticed. And I think that's another part of the problem, in that as technologists, if we want to be socially responsible, there needs to be sort of this constructive dialogue with society, basically, about what the implications are of these technologies. Because it's, like I said, it's moving so friggin' fast, it's ridiculous.
That's right. I think the problem is, who do you talk to in society who isn't in the tech community who gets it? And that's a challenge, because once you actually understand what's happening, wow, this is really amazing. You bring ICT together with the cloud. You have just virtualized computing. You have virtualized the future.
Yeah.
You can do pretty much anything. This is amazing.
Yeah, and then you layer underneath that, operational technology, all the real deep IoT stuff, and then your mind gets blown again, right?
Now you want to find, so, okay, this is doable. Now we need to think, how are we going to do this without it becoming dystopian?
Yeah, and, exactly.
And I'm not sure there's enough good thinking around that, if I'm really honest. And then we need to challenge our social science colleagues to step up, and not, rather than just go, rah, 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 it's wrong.
Yeah.
Which you get, no, it's not wrong. It's right. It's wonderful that we can do this. But we need help to think it through in some better frameworks around responsibility and so on.
So your thoughts on some bright spots for 5G innovation based on these test beds, the programs that you've been working on?
Well,
what are some of the bright spots?
Yeah, I can't quite say this is just 5G, right? But healthcare has to shoot up to the top here with the COVID crisis.
Okay.
And what we see, this phenomenal digitization of healthcare, just at the simple level of, I want to see a doctor and I can now have a consultation online, and we see the majority of consultations going digital. And this was much forecast for years, but is now come about within a course of less than 1 year. Mm-hmm. So, I'm working with a spin out from Oxford University called Oxford Digital Health, and OXDH, OX Digital Health. And they are, clever folks, and the uptake is just quite astonishing, to be honest. Because I think the numbers were something like 5% of consultations were digital last year, and it's now over 50%. Mm-hmm. So you just got a massive transformational moment. Mm-hmm. And then in that context, there's so much going on in healthcare tech at the biomedical level that suddenly you begin to be able to do image scanning, and also the whole thing becomes a digital process. Mm-hmm. This has been brewing for 5-10 years. Mm. But I think in this period now, we'll see a flip within a period of 18 months. Mm. What will come out of it again is, I was even on the phone with a small island who are going to build a hospital who said, actually, we're probably going to not build that hospital now. We're going to invest in digital health and build a digital health service without a hospital. Mm-hmm. And they'd already got the money to start the building, big building. But they said, actually, we might scrap the whole building, because why do we want a building?
Maybe a smaller building. Right, still need hospitals. Just a slightly.
You need an operating theatre, and you need some inpatient services, but all that outpatient stuff, and even the
clinic,
all be done remotely. So they were reconsidering the whole. You get a lot of money for buildings in the public. The public sector understands physical world. It understands buildings and roads. It doesn't understand digital. Mm-hmm. So they're suddenly grappling with, well, hold on a minute. If we spent a third of what we were going to spend on the budget, we've then got shed loads of money to spend on the digitization of healthcare project. Loads. And when they told us the amount of money, we were kind of like, yeah, that is actually loads. So, these buildings, they're expensive, and you can get a lot more for your money if you just start digitizing. Maybe it's even better for the environment too. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you have it. Straight from Paul Wilson, the guy who does everything. So, Paul, do you want to take a moment to share with our audience how they can get in touch with you? And maybe you can list off the many, many projects that you're involved with and how they can get involved with those as well.
I've been working with TM Forum until recently, and they've got this fabulous show on right now, Digital Transformation World Series. They got more than 8,000 people registered. Great content. It's spread over 6 weeks, which I think is genius. So you can, dip in. And so that's a nice, but if you can find out about UK 5G on uk5g.org, and that shows you all the test beds and trials that are being going on around the UK. Another one to look up is smartcitiesworld.net. About 120,000 people read that every month around the world. Latest stuff on smart cities. And then you can take a look at oxdh.health. And see a revolution that's happening in healthcare spin out from Oxford University. There's 3 fun ones to start with.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And, I really appreciate you joining me on this podcast. And to our audience, if you would like to find out more about NextCurve's research, just go and check out our research blog at www.next-curve.com. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube and Apple podcast channels. Just look up NextCurve and it should pop right up. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate your sharing, and we'll have to have you on again sometime in the near future.
Well, thank you for having me. It's we're very excited to be here.
That was really fun. It was really fun. And so until next time, be safe and keep healthy, and jam out on those bongo drums next time. The congas. Yeah. All right. Take care, Paul.
Yes. Thanks a lot.
Visit us at www.next-curve.com.